Emma stepped out of her car just before midnight, the cold air biting through her coat as the engine went silent in a way that felt final. And she knew instantly something was wrong because the dashboard lights flickered and died instead of fading, normally leaving her standing alone in the quiet driveway of her rented townhouse. Exhausted from a long hospital shift and carrying the weight of a day filled with worry she had not had time to process. And when she tried the key again, hoping it was just a mistake, the car answered with nothing but a weak click that echoed too loudly in the still street, making her chest tighten as she looked around at the dark houses and empty road, realizing she was stranded at the worst possible time, when everyone she trusted was asleep, and she leaned against the car for a moment, breathing slowly, reminding herself not to panic because panic never fixed anything. But the tiredness pressed hard on her thoughts and made simple decisions feel heavy. And she pulled out her phone to call roadside help before stopping herself, knowing it would take hours and cost more than she could afford that week, and her mind went to Sarah, her best friend since college, the one person she usually. But when she checked the time again, she hesitated because Sarah had an early morning and Emma hated feeling like a problem someone else had to solve. So she stood there in the cold, watching her breath rise and disappear, feeling the quiet settle around her like a question she could not answer until a different name crossed her mind. One she had not expected: Jake, Sarah's older brother. The one who never pushed himself into conversations but somehow always noticed when someone needed help. And Emma felt unsure even thinking about it because she had never contacted him directly before. But the night felt long and the driveway felt lonely. And the thought of staying there until morning made her stomach twist. So before she could overthink it, she typed a short message, keeping it polite and brief, apologizing for the late hour and explaining the situation without drama. Then stared at the screen after sending it, half expecting regret to hit her. But instead there was only a strange calm, if she had already accepted whatever answer would come, and the phone remained silent for a moment that felt longer than it was, long enough for her to imagine him asleep. His phone face down, the message unread until morning, and she prepared herself to wait it out alone. But then the screen lit up in her hand, and his reply was simple and immediate, saying he was on his way, and Emma blinked, surprised by how quickly relief washed over her, warming her more than her coat ever could, and she replied with thanks, her fingers slightly stiff from the cold, then slipped the phone back into her pocket and waited, pacing a little to keep warm while her thoughts raced ahead of her, wondering why he had responded so fast and why that mattered to her at all. And as the minutes passed, she noticed how quiet the neighborhood was, how the streetlights reflected off the thin layer of frost on the pavement, how the moment felt suspended, as if something important was moving toward her through the darkness. And when headlights finally appeared at the end of the street, her heart lifted in a way she did not expect, and Jake's truck pulled in smoothly, engine humming steady and sure. And he stepped out wearing a jacket and an expression that held concern without urgency, as if he was exactly where he was supposed to be. And Emma felt a small wave of embarrassment for needing help, but he brushed it away with a calm greeting and a question about her night that felt genuine, not polite, and as she explained briefly, he listened fully, nodding, already moving to check the car without making her feel foolish. And she watched him work under the dim light, noticing how focused he was, how comfortable he seemed handling the problem. And the cold no longer felt as sharp because the night no longer felt empty. And in that moment, standing there with him, while the world slept around them, Emma sensed that this was more than just a broken car and a late-night favor. Even if she could not yet explain why, only that something about this quiet help, offered without hesitation, had surprised her in a way that lingered, like the first note of a song she did not know but already wanted to hear again. Jake popped the hood and got straight to work, his movements calm and sure as if late-night problems were something he handled often. and Emma stood a few steps back at first, unsure whether to help or simply stay out of the way. But the silence between them did not feel awkward. It felt thoughtful, filled only by the soft sounds of the engine cooling and the distant hum of the street. And when Jake asked her to try the key again, his voice steady and warm, she did as he said, feeling a small rush of hope even before the engine responded and while he checked the battery and cables. He explained what he was doing in simple words, not to show off, but to include her. And that small detail stayed with her because so many people fix things without caring whether others understood, and as they talked, the conversation moved naturally, jumping from her long shifts at the hospital to his work, to how strange it felt being awake while the rest of the world slept. And Emma found herself laughing softly at something he said, surprised at how easy it felt to relax around him. And she realized she had never really spoken to Jake like this before. Not without Sarah nearby, not without distractions, and the more they talked, the more she noticed the way he listened. How he remembered small details she mentioned in passing. How his attention never drifted to his phone or the road, and when the engine finally turned over and came to life, the sound felt like a small victory. But instead of rushing to close the hood and say goodbye, Jake leaned against the car and took a slow breath, and Emma did the same, as if neither of them was ready for the moment to end. And the cold air no longer bothered her because the conversation had shifted into something quieter and more personal. And she found herself talking about the stress she carried, about the feeling of being strong all the time and how heavy that could be, and Jake did not try to fix those things the way he fixed the car. He simply listened, nodding, letting her words land without judgment, and that surprised her more than anything else. Because she was used to people offering advice, when she only wanted understanding, and when he spoke, he shared small pieces of his own life, not dramatic stories. Just honest thoughts about responsibility and feeling like the older one who had to stay steady for everyone else. And Emma felt a connection form quietly, not sudden or overwhelming, but real, like a bridge built one careful step at a time. And the street felt smaller, warmer, as if the night itself was holding its breath. And at some point, Emma realized she was no longer thinking about how late it was or how tired she had been, because the moment had pulled her fully into it, and when Jake finally stepped back and closed the hood, he smiled in a way that felt softer than before, and she thanked him again, meaning more than just the help with the car, but neither of them said that out loud. And as they stood there, the silence returned. But it was different now, filled with thoughts neither was ready to name, and Emma felt a gentle pull in her chest. Not fear, not excitement, but curiosity. And she wondered when this had started, when a simple favor had turned into something that mattered, and Jake glanced at her as if he felt it too, then said he was glad she had called him, and those words stayed with her. Simple but heavy with meaning, because she realized she was glad too. Glad she had reached out, glad he had answered, and glad that in the quiet of that late night, she had seen a side of him she never expected, and as he finally stepped away toward his truck. Emma knew the night had changed something, even if neither of them understood what it was yet. Only that it would not fade as easily as the cold once the engine was warm and running again. After that late-night encounter, Emma couldn't stop thinking about Jake, and it surprised her how often his calm presence lingered in her mind. How the memory of his quiet smile and patient listening made the stress of her long shifts feel lighter, and it wasn't just gratitude she felt anymore, it was something more complicated. Something that tugged at her heart in ways she didn't expect, and she started noticing him in small ways. Like how he always seemed thoughtful, polite, and careful, never forcing conversation but making space for her when it mattered, and the messages between them grew slowly. Casual at first, jokes about work, funny stories from Sarah's family, small things that seemed unimportant but carried a quiet warmth, and every reply from him felt significant. Each good night lingering in her mind longer than it should, making her imagine what it would be like to spend more time with him, to see his day-to-day life beyond the moments she already knew, And yet every thought carried a weight, 'cause she knew how complicated feelings could be with her best friend involved. And she was terrified of crossing a line that couldn't be uncrossed, but the heart doesn't always listen to reason. And she could feel her connection with Jake growing, patient, gentle, and impossible to ignore. One evening, after a week of careful conversations, he invited her for a quiet coffee at a small cafe downtown, a neutral space that felt safe. No. And when she arrived, she found him already there, his posture relaxed, a small smile waiting. And the moment felt different, charged with a quiet anticipation neither of them had admitted out loud. And as they sat across from each other, Emma realized how easy it was to speak with him. How natural it felt to share thoughts she usually kept tucked away, and Jake listened with the same intensity as that night in the driveway. But now there was something more in his eyes, a vulnerability he rarely showed, and he didn't force anything, didn't rush her. He simply let the conversation flow. And when she laughed, she noticed he lingered a moment longer than necessary, a small gesture that spoke louder than words, and as they talked, she sensed the connection deepening. Like roots growing beneath the surface, unseen but strong, and the nervous excitement she felt wasn't anxiety but a strange thrill of discovering something genuine, a bond forming quietly, yet undeniably. When the conversation shifted, as it inevitably did, to personal feelings, Jake took a deep breath, a pause that made Emma's heart race. And then he admitted, softly, carefully, that he had felt something for her for a while, that he had noticed. Her kindness, her strength, her ability to carry herself even under pressure, and he had kept it quiet, worried about complicating her friendship with Sarah. But unable to ignore it any longer, and Emma's chest tightened, a mix of fear and relief. Because she realized she felt the same, but had buried it under rational thoughts of boundaries and what was right. And now, hearing him speak so openly, it was impossible to deny the truth in her own heart. And she told him with trembling honesty that she had felt it too. Had felt it for weeks, months even, but had been scared of what it meant, scared of hurting Sarah, scared of what people would think. But hearing him say the words aloud made it real, tangible, and terrifyingly wonderful. And in that small cafe, under dim light and quiet chatter of other patrons, they agreed to be careful, to respect boundaries, to let this feeling exist without rushing into anything that could hurt anyone. A pact made quietly but meaningfully, a promise to acknowledge emotions without giving them reckless freedom. And in that agreement, Emma felt something profound, a sense of relief and clarity, because she realized that feelings didn't have to be chaotic or guilty to be real, that love could exist in patience, in thoughtfulness, in unspoken understanding. And she looked at Jake then, really looked, noticing the way he exhaled slowly, the tension in his shoulders melting, the quiet joy in his eyes that matched hers, and she felt a shift inside herself. A recognition that this connection was not a fleeting thing, not a momentary spark, but something steady, growing, something worth tending carefully. And as they left the cafe and walked together under the streetlights, side by side but not touching yet, the night air felt lighter, the steps lighter, 'cause they carried a secret they didn't need to hide anymore, a shared truth that was both fragile and strong. And Emma realized that sometimes the most unexpected feelings were also the most honest, that the heart had a way of recognizing what the mind resisted. And in Jake's quiet company, she found something she had not expected to find with anyone, a kind of safety, a kind of warmth, a kind of unspoken promise. And though neither of them knew exactly where this path would lead, they knew together it had begun in a way that was real, steady, and unforgettable. And the thought of what could come next made her chest flutter with a mixture of hope and fear, a reminder that life's surprises often came softly, quietly, and at the most unexpected moments, and that sometimes the bravest thing was simply to acknowledge them. After weeks of careful, slow-growing conversations, Emma realized that her feelings for Jake were no longer something she could quietly set aside. And yet every step forward felt weighed by the thought of Sarah, her best friend, who had unknowingly brought them together and whose trust she did not want to betray, and so she spent nights turning over every interaction in her mind, analyzing the way he smiled, how he listened, the subtle warmth in his presence that made ordinary moments feel significant, and despite the fear of complications, she could not ignore the pull between them, a pull that grew with every message, every shared laugh, and every moment spent in quiet connection. And she found herself wondering if Sarah would understand, if she would feel betrayed, or if she would see the same truth Emma now felt, that sometimes love appeared in unexpected places, patient, respectful, and sincere. And one evening, summoning more courage than she thought she possessed, Emma decided to be honest, to speak openly with Sarah before taking any steps further with Jake, because keeping secrets would have tainted everything. And she called Sarah over for a quiet talk at her apartment, her heart pounding with nerves as she watched her best friend settle into the couch with a curious expression, the soft hum of the city outside filling the spaces between them. And Emma began cautiously, explaining how her feelings had grown for Jake slowly and naturally, how it had begun with a simple late-night favor, how his quiet presence had made her feel seen and understood in ways she hadn't expected, and how careful they had been not to rush anything. And as she spoke, she watched Sarah's face, bracing for anger, disappointment, or hurt. But instead, Sarah listened in silence, her eyes soft but serious, absorbing each word without interruption. And when Emma finished, the pause that followed felt long, heavy, and decisive. And then Sarah smiled, a little sadly, a little knowingly, and said that if anyone deserved happiness, it was both of them, and that she trusted Emma and Jake to be honest, to be careful, and to respect the bond they shared as friends. And in that moment, huge weight lifted from Emma's shoulders, the tension and fear she had carried for weeks dissolving into relief and gratitude, and she realized how rare it was to have a friend who could understand without judgment, who could let love exist without resentment. And that understanding created a space where she could breathe freely, where her feelings for Jake could exist openly without guilt. And from that day forward, Emma and Jake began to explore their connection carefully, not rushing into romance, but letting their bond grow naturally, nurtured by shared values, late night conversations, small gestures of kindness, and the deepening trust they had in each other. And every moment together became a building block for something steady and meaningful, a love not born of drama or urgency, but of patience, respect, and quiet understanding. And as the days turned into weeks, Emma found herself noticing new things about Jake: the gentleness in his voice, the thoughtfulness in his actions, the way he remembered tiny details about her life, the way he seemed genuinely invested in her happiness without asking for anything in return. And with each observation, her admiration grew, intertwined with affection, making her realize that this connection was more than a fleeting crush. It was a growing, living bond that demanded care and honesty. And she felt the thrill of anticipation in their moments together, a steady heartbeat of excitement that never overwhelmed, only encouraged reflection and presence. And as they walked side by side under autumn skies, sharing stories and quiet laughter, the world felt fuller, lighter, as if the challenges and hesitations of the past had been necessary steps to reach this point. And Emma recognized that love sometimes arrived in whispers, not shouts, in gestures rather than declarations. And the simplicity of their companionship became its own magic, a reminder that the most profound connections often grow in quiet, unexpected ways, shaped by trust, patience, and the willingness to see another person fully, to accept them with both their flaws and virtues. And in that understanding, Emma felt a sense of security she had never known, a warmth that went beyond attraction, reaching into the comfort of knowing someone would be there, fully present, fully aware, fully caring. And as she glanced at Jake during one of their walks, noticing how he adjusted his scarf and offered a reassuring smile, she felt a rush of gratitude for that fateful night when her car had failed, for the knock on her door, for the moment he had shown up without hesitation. And she understood that life sometimes nudges people toward the right connections in the quietest of ways, and that what begins as a small act of kindness can grow into something that changes the course of your life. And as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky with colors neither could fully name, Emma and Jake walked home together. The future uncertain, yet bright with possibility, carrying with them the gentle, surprising love that had begun in the silence of midnight and now thrived in the light of understanding, patience, and trust. Proving that sometimes the most unexpected love stories are also the most lasting, and that the heart often knows before the mind is ready to accept it. And in that recognition, Emma felt complete, hopeful, and undeniably alive, knowing that her life had quietly shifted into something extraordinary, all because of one small, surprising night.